Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to soggy Edinburgh. My name's Yvonne Gordon. I'm the Head of Education at the Centre for the Moving Image and at the Film Festival. It's a great delight to welcome you this morning. I'd like to introduce you to Jamie Chambers for the launch of the Film Education Journal.
Thanks, Yvonne. Thank you all for joining us today. As Yvonne said, I'm Jamie Chambers. I am the founding editor and the general editor of the Film Education Journal. And we are extremely proud today to launch the Film Education Journal and our inaugural edition, which is, as of now, I believe, available to read online for free at the Ingenta link on this card. So please do check out our first issue alive today. The Film Education Journal is, as many of you will already know, an online open access publication, meaning that it is free for anyone to read and download. From here onwards, the journal will be published twice a year, in June and in November. As a publication, it is fully peer-reviewed, which means that for every piece of writing that is submitted to us, we will find two reviewers who have an approximate experience and expertise, which is kind of close to that of the piece under consideration. Given, though, that film education is something of a broad church, as I will go on to talk about in a minute, those peer reviewers may come from a number of different places and backgrounds. They may be filmmakers, they may be classroom teachers, they may be policymakers, which is to say, not all of our peer reviewers are going to be academics. We want this publication to be open to all. And on that note, we are currently inviting submissions for the third edition of the journal, which is a general edition, so an unthemed edition, for which the initial submission deadline is the start of September. So please do consider sending us some of your work for that. The Film Education Journal is published by University College London's Institute of Education Press in partnership with the British Film Institute, with Creative Scotland, with Centre for the Moving Image and Transgressive North. And I should add here a special mention to Creative Scotland, whose generous support has allowed us to develop the journal and this new event today, the Scottish International Film Education Conference, SIFEC. And that's the other thing that we're launching today. For this is actually the first edition, the inaugural edition of the Scottish International Film Education Conference. We very much hope it will go on to become an annual event and become a regular part of Scotland's growing, energetic film education scene. We have a fantastic and diverse programme of events for you today. Please do check out the programmes, which should be in front of you, with some very special guests from around the world sharing their perspectives on film education, and also a chance to see some films in the afternoon. So please do stay for as much of that as you can. So, anyhow, my own personal perspective on film education is somewhat fragmented and multi-dimensional. I come to film education as someone who has been, and in many ways still is, a film student, but is now also a film teacher, a film scholar, and perhaps, on a personal level, first and foremost for me, a filmmaker and a film audience member. I've had the great privilege of teaching film in a variety of different contexts. I've taught in both primary schools and secondary schools here in Edinburgh and East Lothian as part of Scotland's brilliant Understanding Cinema project, which we'll be hearing about later in the day, in the afternoon. And I've also taught both theory and film theory and practice at undergraduate and postgraduate level at the University of Exeter and the University of Glasgow. So alongside that and my work as a filmmaker, I've also had the opportunity through my research to be able to take a step back and think about film education in a broader context and draw on aspects of pedagogical, political and aesthetic theory to try to illuminate some of the experiences of film education that I've had so far. So it seemed to me that in a complex sense, film education is interdisciplinary in that it involves all of these perspectives, the perspective of the student, the teacher, the scholar, the filmmaker, and many more. For kind of looking around at those of us here today, I can see that film education also involves the contributions and the perspectives of policymakers, of those working in funding bodies and arts organizations, in cinemas, in film festivals. The list goes on. It therefore seems to me that the study of film education and the discourses around film education should reflect that interdisciplinary nature. And that has been one of the key priorities for us in developing the Film Education Journal as a publication, to try and create a space, an arena, where those different perspectives involved in film education can sit alongside each other and, crucially, speak to each other in conversation. We want the Film Education Journal to attract both the highest standard of international academic scholarship about film education, but at the same time we want the journal to remain resolutely open to the many other crucial voices integrally involved in that conversation, whether those be classroom teachers, whether they be filmmakers, policymakers, and so forth. And that touches on another aspect of our aspiration with the Film Education Journal, which is to create a publication which does not look to set itself at a distance from the practice of film education, but very much looks to get its hands dirty and to pursue a notable proximity with what is actually happening in film education in diverse, specific contexts around the world. I've written elsewhere that I feel that for many of us who write about film education, there is a certain element of activism, of wanting to shape things that are happening, of wanting to change things, to create interventions, and so forth. And that's always a sense of pursuing that proximity to what is actually happening in classrooms and other learning spaces. And it would seem to me that film education globally is at something of a formative moment, in that we are seeing an increasing number of initiatives set up to share resources internationally between different approaches to film education, such as the Cinémathèque's brilliant Cinéma 100 ans de Jeunesse project, which I know many of us here are a part in one way or another, which seems film educators come together once a year from Europe, from Latin America, from Asia and beyond. And for myself and for my co-editors, who you'll hear from in a minute, being part of projects like Cinéma 100 ans has been one of the key impetuses behind the development of this journal. And more generally, it does seem to be a very fertile moment to be launching a publication which looks not only to participate and contribute to global conversations about film education, but also to actively try and influence and shape them. And that leads me to our other key aspiration with the Film Education Journal, which is to pursue from the outset a marked sense of internationalism. And I'm very pleased to see that aspiration reflected in many of our guests who will be presenting their perspectives and work to you later in the day. For we have some very esteemed guests here from Burkina Faso, from Austria and Germany and Denmark, as well as Scotland and England. I'm keen, however, right at the outset to problematize that sense of internationalism to an extent, or rather to ask more of it. For, as we have written in our editorial for the first edition, I feel that too frequently the sense of internationalism that I have myself encountered in film education projects often tends to be circumscribed by the ready boundaries of the European Union and more generally by Western perspectives on history and culture. And particularly given the UK's disintegrating relationship with Europe, but also given broader perspectives on history, I'm personally very keen in this respect for the Film Education Journal to reach well beyond that and to an extent trouble some of the European orbits, the pre-existing European orbits of film education, so that we can reach out and include voices and perspectives from beyond the West and seek the expertise of the world's great film cultures that are frequently left outside the frame. The film cultures of West Africa, of Iran, of Japan, Central America, to name but a few. So, which is a long way of saying that we're very ambitious about what we want to achieve with this publication. And indeed, when we were writing our first editorial together, my co-editor, Mark Reid, who you'll hear from in a minute, gently chastised me for getting a little carried away with the possibilities afforded by a film education journal. This is not a film education this is a film education publication, Mark told me, and not the United Nations. Fair enough, Mark. That said, I do still feel that there remains something utopian, for want of a better word, in the opportunities that a new publication like this might create. And ultimately, to return to my personal perspective, I feel that what is at stake in film education is the continuance, the ongoing passing on of film culture in its broadest sense. And as for someone for whom that participation in film culture is one of the central tent poles of my life, my educational experiences have been absolutely crucial in shaping me and the way that I watch film, the way that I think about film, the way I make films, and now the way that I teach film myself. I've had some brilliant experiences of film education, and I think in particular here of some of the great film teachers that I have had, of Alan Bernstein and Margaret Glover at the London Film School, of Joe Kember at the University of Exeter, and of Alan Bergler at the Cinémathèque Française, for, as I said, I continue to be a student. And those experiences have had the effect of broadening, deepening, and inflecting my sense of possibility in terms of what film could be, what film might be, and alongside that, what my participation in film culture could be. And alongside these, I've also had, as I'm sure we all have, some less desirable experiences of film education, and to an extent I still carry around some of the bruises from those experiences, which for a time had the opposite effect of closing down those possibilities, of circumscribing my sense of film culture and limiting what I felt my participation in it might look like. So that's a slightly roundabout way of saying that I feel, therefore, that how we approach that ongoing transmission of film culture in its broadest sense is intensely important, and therefore that it is very important that we develop a strong, diverse, global discourses around our approaches to film education, which crucially remains open and inclusive to difference. And that is exactly what the Film Education Journal sets out to do. And on a final note, one thing that I've found in my time working as an editor on the Film Education Journal so far is that there is sometimes a certain irony that arises in film education writing, for it often feels like a repetition or a re-rehearsal of ground that has already been trodden by film studies and film culture more generally. For example, we have in the editorial team found ourselves recently having various debates about concepts of value and taste, which, you know, for those of you in film studies will, of course, be a very well-trodden area of discourse. But there is this interesting sense that in thinking about how we want to present film culture to new participants, whether those be primary school children or those at university level, that we need to revisit and re-clarify our arguments about what film is, what it does, and what it could do. And I understand that for some there may be a certain absurdity for that in the repetition of it. However, I feel there is also an opportunity here for, in revisiting these discourses, I feel it also allows us the possibility of challenging certain assumptions and orthodoxies. For example, as in our first edition, regarding the relationship between film theory and film practice. So yes, I feel that we have, with the Film Education Journal, an opportunity to revisit and perhaps revise how we conceive of film culture as part of the process of thinking about how we want to then invite new voices into it. Anyhow, that's more than enough from me, but before I pass over to Andrew Byrne, my co-editor, I just want to conclude with a few words of thanks to some of the people and institutions that have been crucial in helping us shape and develop the Film Education Journal over the past 2 years. As before, we're extremely grateful to Creative Scotland, whose support has allowed us to develop the journal and today's conference. And we're particularly grateful to Scott Donaldson, without whose support and generosity we would not have made it this far. Thank you, Scott. We'd also like to thank our colleagues at CMI who are here today, Yvonne and Ken and Flip, and all our volunteers who are helping us today, who have helped us put on this exciting, ambitious event. Again, it's our hope that this event, the Scottish International Film Education Conference, becomes annual. So please do keep an eye out for what's going next year and consider joining us again. I would like to single out the commitment and tenacity of Pat Gordon-Smith, but also the wider UCL Institute of Education Press team more generally, which has been crucial in shaping the journal and helping us set our standards very high in terms of what we expect from our contributors and what we expect from ourselves. And finally, I'd like to thank my co-editors, Mark Reid, Andrew Byrne, who you'll be hearing from in a minute, both of whom believed in this idea when it was just a whimsy and were willing to dedicate their time and considerable insights to helping us bring it to fruition. So thank you both very much, Mark and Andrew. Okay, and of course, thank you all for attending. It's great to see so many people here. We have a really interesting, diverse program of events. Please do stay for as much of that as you can. And of course, please do consider submitting some of your writing to the journal. I'm now going to pass over to my co-editor, Andrew Byrne, from the Institute of Education. Thank you all very much.
Thanks very much, Jamie. And thank you for that energetic introduction to the conference and the journal. I'll be a bit less energetic than that, but I also feel Jamie said quite a lot of the things that I would have wanted to say, which relieves me of some of the burden. He's right to say that Mark and I were also enthusiastic members of this enterprise from the beginning, when it was a twinkle in Jamie's eye. And for me, it's been a kind of culmination of a long series of engagements with film education, media education, and so on, which began it began for me actually in the late 1970s when I was teaching in a school in East Anglia. I think my first encounter with film in the classroom was a reel-to-reel video player. And we only had one film in the school, and it was a rather ancient tape of the animation of Animal Farm. So I used it with my O-level English group in 1979, I think it was. I then made a bit of a leap and started teaching music videos in the early heady days of MTV, when Michael Jackson's Thriller, I think, was the most popular one. So moved from there into being a member of an early sort of enterprise in England in the specialist schools movement that was funded by the UK government. And my school became the first media arts college, which was interesting. And I have fond memories of Kerry and Mark visiting our school when we proudly displayed the students' films on what was then a very new technology, which was a PowerPoint presentation projected on a big screen in the school hall, which seemed very exciting at the time. So to come from all of that to this, to, as Jamie said, what we hope will be a kind of global conversation about the meaning, distinctive nature, pedagogic processes of film education is very exciting. I think I should say a little bit about why UCL, my own institution, is interested in this as well. It's really two institutions, actually. The Institute of Education, as you may know, was an autonomous university of education, effectively a college of the University of London up to a few years ago. And we have a master's degree there, which has changed its name and morphed in many ways over the years, but it's one of the oldest MAs in media in the country. And it's always had a specialist kind of focus on education, media education, film education. And about 20 years ago, Mark and I began talking about how we might develop a module based around filmmaking with digital technologies, which again then seemed very new at a time when teachers were only just beginning to get to grips with the possibilities of those. And we started them, and the first point of that module was to introduce teachers to them when they couldn't do that anywhere else. They couldn't do it at home, they couldn't do it on their phones, they wouldn't have those cameras and editing tools without our providing them. And it's gradually changed. The module still exists. It's changed as well to a time when they can do all of that on their phone. It's become a rather different thing. But it's still going, and we still teach it with Mark, and the students from our institution go down and make films at the South Bank in the depths of winter. They're always rather grim films. It's always a bit grey, you know, South Bank in winter. We do occasionally consider moving it to the summer term when we might get a rather different, more cheerful kind of film from our students. Our students have changed over the years. We now have many Chinese students who've discovered that we are now de facto the media MA of University College London. They don't have an MA in media and cultural studies apart from ours. And we merged with UCL a few years ago. And one of the effects was to gain a huge intake of Chinese students, mostly media graduates, many of them film graduates also, many of them broadcast television trainees, and many of them interested in the nature of Chinese film, the representation of Chinese history in film, and the relationship also between Chinese film and Asian video games, of which I'll say a little bit more in a minute. So we have a particular interest. The other thing about UCL, of course, is that UCL itself was one of the earliest universities to adopt film studies as an academic discipline. And so in merging with them, we've met up with our counterparts in mainstream academic film studies. So we're beginning a conversation across that divide, you know, why might they be interested in filmmaking with 10-year-olds, you know? Why might we be interested in the arcane disputes of deep film theory? And of course, that relationship should exist. You know, they're very keen to make common cause with the filmmakers of the present time, with the media industries in London, and we're very keen to say to them, if you're doing that, you need to be talking to the filmmakers of the future in their 10-year-old places of learning, or earlier, as you will hear from Carey a little bit later on. So that's an interesting conversation, and we're beginning work on a kind of joint media program on UCL's new campus, which is planned for the Olympic Park to launch in a few years' time. So we hope to have an integrated media program at master's level and at undergraduate level. And we hope that some of that work will find its way into the journal and the discourses which Jamie has signalled. I think, finally, I just wanted to have a think about what kind of questions this journal may concern itself with. And you'll hear some of those questions a little bit later on today. They are perennial questions, as Jamie said, and we'll have to puzzle over them. They never resolve, these questions. They are kind of perennially interesting. Questions like, for instance, I've always found, I don't know if other people have found this, if you make a film with 10-year-olds and you ask them to film a conversation between two people, they'll point the camera at the two people and they'll film them coterminal in the same space. And yet they can read the shot-reverse shot structure in film without any trouble at all, and they see it every day on television and film. But it's not how they naturally choose to film, in my experience. Other people may have other experiences. So that kind of dissonance between the way in which they imagine two people having a conversation in real time, real space, and how you might capture that in film, and their understanding of the rather, you know, constructed language of film that they see every day is perennially interesting to me. Another question which Jamie and Mark and I have talked about for a while, what kind of profound truths can be expressed through magic and fantasy in film, and why are children interested in that, and what does it mean to them, and are those truths different from the kind of truths that can be expressed in neo-realist film or in documentary film? What are the levels of profundity? What are the differences in the truths expressed? And for children, I think that's an important question as well. Another question which was raised actually in the event last year at the BFI, which Alain Bergala presented at, and some of us responded to, was the relationship between film and other moving image media, or other media in general. So there's the question of, you know, whether film is a kind of pure art form with a distinctive cultural value on a particular pedestal here. You can see I don't quite subscribe to this idea. Or whether it's, you know, scandalously in bed with its scurrilous cousins of television and video games and social media. You can tell I kind of believe it is. Kind of gave that away a little bit. So another debate. And in relation to education, the sort of corollary of that is the relationship between film education and media education more broadly, another topic which we will continue to worry away at. Maybe finally, there's a kind of question about the digital age. You know, is the iPhone selfie the kind of acorn from which the great oaks of cinematic art might grow in the future? I was talking last night to Aoife Donnelly, who's one of the primary school teachers who you're going to hear from this afternoon, when they can get out of school and get to join us at the conference. And she was telling me about how her 10-year-old at that primary school in Edinburgh had embarked on the filmmaking process with Jamie's help, and then taken their films to Paris and had them received by the Santon team there. And she was just describing the moment at which one of her class had moved from the kind of iPhone selfie moment to the filmmaking moment, and how it involved just turning the phone sideways and suddenly realizing that was a rather different perspective. So that kind of moment, I think, is something which I'm sure we will try to capture and theorize and develop pedagogies around in the years to come. So I very much look forward to those conversations and to being part of them. And congratulations to the whole team, particularly Jamie, and as he said, to our publishing team at IOE-UCL. Thanks very much. Enjoy the conference.
We're now going to hear from Scott Donaldson from Creative Scotland, who has been the principal funder of the journal so far. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you. I'm just going to use my phone for my notes. Try to look modern. Scotland's education system differs little from those elsewhere in the world in giving insufficient attention to the moving image. Note, moving image, Andrew, not film. Ever more so as media and platforms breed and multiply. That said, people across Scotland have organised and sought to bring film education into the mainstream of our educational systems since 1960. I've got a report in the office from a conference back then of school teachers and policy people seeking pretty much the same things many of us are continuing to seek today, unfortunately. But people have continued to advocate for film education and continued to develop practice and provision since then in schools, libraries, workshops and film venues and colleges and universities, of course. There are many promising developments currently, including the development of the Screen Unit Partnership and the doubling of public funding for Screen in Scotland. And I'm hopeful that over the next few years we'll be able to tie together and strengthen the many strands and contexts of film education. Creative Scotland is delighted to have supported the development of the journal, thanks to Andrew, Mark, Jamie, and I'm particularly glad that the journal is interdisciplinary and includes contributions from the whole film education sector, far beyond academia, and we look forward to the contribution it will make to film education here in Scotland and internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And finally, we're just going to hear from my other co-editor, Mark Reid, from the British Film Institute.
Why would the BFI be interested in film education? There's a good question. It's an 85-year-old organisation. It was founded on the premise of educating children and young people through and about the medium of film. We're concerned with the wider moving image. Our Royal Charter from the 1980s says it kind of enjoins us to develop appreciation and understanding of the arts of film and television. So it's not just about cinema. We're not just film fetishists, although there are lots of film fetishists in the organisation. So for much of that 85 years, the organisation has been concerned with education around film, and I guess for 50 odd of those years it's had an interest in scholarship and research around film and around film education, and it's the kind of emphasis between scholarship around pure film studies and scholarship and practical engagement with film education has kind of varied in that time. So we were instrumental in setting up the Society for Education for Film and Television in the 60s or 70s, Kerry? Late 60s, early 70s? A long time ago, but even before then. Out of which came the Screen Journal, which has evolved in a different direction. So I guess when Jamie came to us with his whimsy, it's like that old Woody Allen joke, isn't it? I've got a whimsy, I wanted some money to turn it into an idea and then maybe develop it into a concept. So that's and from a concept to a kind of fully fledged and published, as of today, journal that reflects exactly as you were both describing, a full spectrum of engagement with the moving image from classrooms with very young children all the way through to seniors, in the academy, in film schools, at home, in that funny kind of twilight zone third space that people talk about, which is not in a formal space but not in a domestic space, and which is trying to marry a more kind of formal and academic and refereed form of writing with a slightly looser, more flexible, more responsive, more conversational, less formal account of practice, which I think it is desperately needed. And the other dimension that both Andrew and Jamie and Scott have alluded to is the international reach, or the kind of aimed international reach. Particularly, that you were mentioning, Andrew, the seminar when we brought Alan Bergler over, and Alejandro at the Austrian Film Museum and the BFI had translated Alan Bergler's book, The Cinema Hypothesis, into English, which it was written in 2003 or so. It's in lots of languages. It wasn't in English until 2 years ago. It's not like it's some kind of Bible, although people might treat it as biblical. But the wider the range of conversations and input, particularly from kind of the francophone world, that we haven't really paid a great deal of attention, I don't think, to the ideas that come out of France and French film education. So having that kind of international exchange will only enrich us as a sector, I think. And I hope it doesn't end up kind of polarising into camps who take one view or another. If we can make the journal a space for conversation, for exchange, for discussion, then we might bring about world peace. I think it's a really great aspiration for us to be having. And just the final thing, just the fact that it's supported and based and backed in Scotland is a great opportunity to showcase the wealth and the diversity and the excellence and the high quality of film education activity that happens up here, so that not everything that's British gets routed through London. It's great that we're launching it in Edinburgh and as part of the oldest film festival in the UK. That's all brilliant too. So that's it from the BFI.